Greetings and welcome to another edition of The Pedal Shift Project. The Pedal Shift Project is a series of conversations, thoughts, and experiments around the bike touring lifestyle. From tips and tricks to ideas on how to ride your ride, let's shrink the world by bike. Show notes and more are available at pedalshift.net/330, and you can email the show at pedalshift@pedalshift.net or text me at 202-930-1109 and check Pedal Shift out on all the socials as well. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 330th edition of the Pedal Shift Project. My name's Tim Mooney. Thanks so much for joining. On this edition, the wait is over. It's time to talk about the big 2023 summer bike tour. And as we'll discover, it's an established route, but it's got a brand new twist. Normally, cycling the Oregon and California coasts between Tillamook and San Francisco takes me about 16 days. What if we leveraged the fantastic and often really surprising transit opportunities and make this tour like listening to your favorite podcasts at 2x speed? Folks, welcome to the PDX-SF2x Tour Preview. I am so excited for this tour. I cannot tell you how much this has been a real pleasure to plan and for it to fit together like a puzzle piece. So this is my classic favorite route. It's a route we have done before. I will fully admit that. Portland to San Francisco via the Oregon and California coasts. But the twist this time, although I have certainly used fast forwards as a part of pieces of this ride before, I have never done this with such heavy transit help. I'm able to get this ride done in literally half the time with a series of transit agencies starting in Portland, Oregon, and ending, from the transit perspective, in Santa Rosa, California. As I said, what normally takes me 16 days along this route is going to take me 8, assuming this all works. So let's talk a little bit about the gear for this particular tour. We're going to go fully loaded. We're going to bring the Safari, my main touring bike. That is exciting. I'm going to try to minimize the weight within the load, even though I'm going to be fully loaded. I'm going to try to find ways to reduce things down. I'm really toying with not bringing a stove with me. There are a couple of opportunities in here where it's not going to feel great to not have a stove, but I think that overall that might be something that pays dividends on for lack of weight. We'll discuss that more once we get into the tour journals itself. As I mentioned, I'm going to be taking the Safari, which means I got to fly it from the East Coast to the West Coast. And that also means there's going to be a choice that's going to be made. And that is I'm going to be having a measurable amount of one of my panniers holding my Dogsbody Ground Effects bike bag. Now, I don't always necessarily have to put that in the pannier, but it's certainly going to be a capacity issue for me. It's not heavy. It just takes up space. That's some kind of, what do we call it? It's a bit of a compromise in that sense, but I think it ultimately ends up being a really good one because of the nature of I'm flying into Portland and flying out of San Francisco. Need to have some way to do that. And as I've talked about before on previous pods, I really hate hunting down bike boxes at the end of a trip. I like to be able to control my own destiny with all of that. I'm going to be flying back and forth on Alaska Airlines, which is my airline of choice when I'm flying a larger bike that's being checked. I have MVP status with Alaska Airlines, which means I get 2 bags that I can check for free as part of my ticket. I am going to be checking the bike as one and my big duffel, which handles the rest of the gear, in another. And that duffel, as you all know, I've used this on so many different trips, most notably and recently the California trip. It's just really critical for those transit fast forwards, helps things out an awful lot. Boy, I've gotten my money's worth out of that duffel. I have a new one that I'm going to eventually rotate into things. But until this one finally gives up the ghost, I'm going to keep using it because it's been really handy. Got a few holes in it. Zipper's mostly working, but at some point it will be retired, but I'll keep using it until then. I have to figure out when the last time I had the Safari out west. It's been more than a few years, so I have to say this is really exciting. Of course, this is the bike that I rode from the Canadian border all the way down to the Mexican border. It's nice to be back on the West Coast with it again. It's just a great bike. It's really built perfectly for a ride like this, so I'm glad to bring it back out. The weather. This is a great time of year to be riding in the West Coast. It may be early enough that I'm going to be avoiding some of the wildfire smoke, which we all know can come into play at any time. Of course, it could happen. I may run into some of that depending on whether or not there are any wildfires in Western Canada or in Oregon or in California. There's likely going to be a bit of a chill in the air, except for one notable portion as we swing inland in California. Most of the time I'll be on the coast, and we'll have days that probably will top out in the 60s Fahrenheit and will be in the mid to low 50s at night Fahrenheit, which is fantastic. It's my kind of riding. I love it. Rain is always possible, but it's relatively unlikely this time of year. Of course, I will be geared up with rain gear as necessary. I don't want to go too much into the schedule because we'll, of course, be talking about that quite a bit every single day with every single tour journal entry. But every day's got a little bit of transit at least, and a little bit of biking at least. Oh, I take that back. Actually, there are some days with absolutely no transit at all. The basics here. I'm going to be flying into Portland on a Saturday night. And by the way, the timing on all this is really critical, and I'll get into why that is in a little bit. Fly into Portland Saturday night, take the first bus to Tillamook, Oregon on the coast, Sunday late morning. I have been on this bus a number of times. You all have been on along for the ride. You know it well. It's the same one. I'm going to be biking and then camping that first night at Cape Lookout State Park near Tillamook. Beautiful, amazing campground. I've only been there once myself, looking forward to a second time there. Then we're going to be doing a combination of bike and bus for the next several days. A little bit of biking, a little bit of busing to make up things. Again, this is a 2x speed trip. I'm going to be making up multiple days as we go along here. Day 2 is going to be a combination of bike and bus. I'll end up near Newport, Oregon. Day 3, combo of bike and bus to North Bend, Oregon. Day 4, combo of bike and bus to near Brookings, Oregon. Day 5, this is a good one, a combination of bus and bike all the way down to the Avenue of the Giants. Yes, Burlington Campground, my favorite campground in the entire world. Yes, sir. And yes, ma'am. And yes, folks. The next day, a very surprising combination of bus and bike all the way to Fort Bragg, California. Yes, that is up and over Leggett Hill. Talk a little bit about that in a moment here. Then a combination again of bus and bike all the way to Samuel P. Taylor State Park, which is right on the precipice. Day 8, all bike to San Francisco. So again, normally that would take me 16 days. We're going to be doing it in 8. In fact, 8 is a magic number here because I'm going to be utilizing 8 different transit agencies, assuming all goes to plan here. And what's fascinating about building this schedule is that you realize how much there is in terms of transit all along this entire route. Indeed, from Tillamook all the way down. In fact, actually, I can go further up to from Astoria up at the very northwestern tip of Oregon, all the way down to Benbow, California. You have contiguous transit opportunities that entire way. Now, is it every day? No, but the whole way down, you could do that. From that point on, you do need a bicycle. And technically, it's only about 66 miles of this entire route, because once you're to the other side of that on Fort Bragg, you have contiguous transit opportunities all the way down to San Francisco and beyond. Really exciting. As I mentioned before, that 66 miles of cycling that I'm going to have to do from Benbow to Fort Bragg is up and over Leggett Hill, and of course, good old Middle Finger Hill as well, the second one, which is worse. And that's going to be a tough day. Now, that's from Burlington Campground to Fort Bragg is nearly 100 miles. I've always wanted to do that, but I've never been a Century kind of guy. And of course, with Leggett in the middle of that, and the fact that it's inland, and the fact that it's often very hot, that can be a lot. So there is 30 miles of transit between, believe it or not, Myers Flat, California, right by the Avenue of the Giants, all the way to Benbow. And that is a critical amount there because that 66 miles is very much in my wheelhouse despite the climb. It's going to be awesome. I'm really excited to push my limits a little bit to do that portion of the ride. As I mentioned, the timing of this ride is really critical. I can only really, if I want to do this in one contiguous shot without any forced 0 days, many of these transit agencies don't operate on weekends. This ended up working out more through happenstance than anything else. It does require an inland bus portion towards the end of the trip that gets me down to Santa Rosa. I would have preferred to stay on the coast for that portion. And as we'll talk about in the compromises, I'm missing out on one of my more favorite parts of the California coast, even though it would be by bus. I'm going to be going inland instead because of the nature of it being on a Saturday. And that is the only bus route that is available. And there's nothing until Monday either way. So I got to make that bus. That's a really critical spot because it's a real big fast forward for me as well. So as I mentioned, there are some compromises to this particular tour. The first thing is I'm, by the very nature of this, skipping some awesome parts of this ride. Some really stellar parts of the Oregon coast, not only from looks and ambiance and vibe, but I'm going to be missing out on cycling some of the more fun parts of it. However, stick around for the what I still get section on all of this because there's a compromise, but it's not so bad. I'm going to be missing out on another part of the California coast that I really like, the South Crescent City Hills. It's that triple hill that's just south of Crescent City. It's a slog. It's tough going, but what a glorious descent. It's beautiful. It's the first of the redwoods. I'm going to be going through it by bus, so I get at least to see it, but unfortunately I won't be able to ride it, which is a real highlight for me. Also, I'll be missing out on Elk Prairie Campground, which was the site of one of my favorite moments in bike touring in my entire run. I did that Canadian Thanksgiving there with a guy that I met who is Canadian, and it was just fun. And it's great memories, and there's good memories with the mysterious James, of course, and just a lot of fun stuff that happened at that campground. Of course, it's beautiful as well in the redwoods. I'm going to be missing out on a major chunk of the Mendocino coast. As I mentioned before, I'm going to be forced inland on one of the bus trips because of the nature of the timing, the day, and what's available. Not only will I not be able to bus on that part of the Mendocino coast, let me flip that around. Not only will I not be able to bike the Mendocino coast in that section, I won't be able to even see it. This is the section of coast where we took the micro camper a couple of years ago and we really enjoyed it. And I'm so bummed to be missing out on towns like Wallala. It's just such a beautiful place. And I'm really grateful actually that I not only got a chance to be there for such an extended time a couple of years ago, but I did actually bike around it on the Brompton, at least in a couple of different capacities. So you also got to hear about that too in a past episode. So those are the compromises. Also, of course, it's shorter. It's nice to have the 16 days to bike, but I really needed to fit this into a shorter window. So 8 days was what I had, and here's what I still get. I get much of the best of the Oregon coast. I tried to make it so that my fast forwards were mostly in parts of the coast that I've either biked recently, in recent years at least, or that I otherwise, they're great. The whole thing is great, but then there are certain parts that are better than others. And I've left the good stuff on the table. I'm also going to be staying at my top 2 campsites in the state of Oregon. I'm going to be staying at Camp Lookout, as I mentioned. I'm also going to be staying at South Beach State Park. And I just love that. South Beach State Park means Newport, Oregon. It means Brewers on the Bay. And we all know how much I love that. I always love to have any kind of a trip to the Oregon coast really centered around Newport, because there's just something about Newport that has always vibed with me. And I'm really excited that I get to go back again this year. I also get to do one thing, a little bit of a compromise. I do not like to camp at Sunset Bay State Park. It's my least favorite of the major campsites that I stay at on the Oregon coast. However, its place was actually really helpful because it's near North Bend. It worked out from a timing with transit and a variety of other things. And most importantly, it allowed me to do a piece of cycling that I really enjoy. One of the top pieces of cycling on the Oregon coast is doing the Seven Devils. I really love that stretch. It's challenging, it's invigorating, and you get it right out of camp, basically. So I'm able to do that. And then I end up in Bandon, Oregon. And just because of the nature of the next fast forward on transit, I might even be able to spend a little more time in Bandon than I typically get to do. I've always felt like I'm a little rushed leaving Bandon because I spend so much time enjoying the Seven Devils. I tend to get a lunch and then I tend to just jet. And this time I think I'd like to try to be able to spend a little more time there. And I think that the bus schedule will allow me to do that, which is fantastic. The bus fast forwards me all the way down to Brookings, Oregon, which takes me to Harris Beach State Park, which may be my 3rd favorite campsite of the entire Oregon coast. Really excited to be back there again. There's usually some really interesting folks in camp. And of course, there's a ton of great things in Brookings. Brookings is a really underrated city in terms of what is available for you. You've got a lot of course, the grocery opportunities, but there's some really good breweries that are popping up in Brookings as well. And I went last time I was in Brookings, you came along for the ride there and ended up at I believe there was a vegan food truck and there was a really good, I think, organic brewery as well. Looking forward to trying all of that out again. Then the next day is a real treat. The transit opportunities that just link together like a bunch of puzzle pieces gets me down past Smith River, down past Arcata, down to Fortuna. And if you remember Fortuna, California, that is the OG spot for bike touring for me. That is where I started my very first bike tour with Climate Ride. And so it holds a really fond place in my heart. It also has Eel River Brewing. Now, I'm not going to camp there because I can fast forward there reasonably quickly in the morning, have a lunch and a resupply in Fortuna, and I'll skip past and go straight to one of the greatest places on earth, Burlington Campground and the Avenue of the Giants. And I'll camp there that night. I just love it. I can't get enough of it. We were there a couple of years ago with the vehicle, with the micro camper. It'll be nice to be back on a bike and to glide right in there after a pretty decent day of cycling. I think it's at least a 30-mile day for me, or maybe a little bit more. The next thing is what I get by what I subtract, and that is the next transit was the really critical piece, the new discovery for me. I don't know if this intercity transit had existed before, but I stumbled upon it when doing research for this trip. I found this bus from, I believe it's Redwood Transit Services, has a fast forward bus for me available from very close, so only a couple of miles away from Burlington Campground, that'll take me past Garberville. And you know what? No disrespect for the nice people who live in Garberville, but I've always found it to be a little spooky. I've told you all about that. I do a resupply there usually in anticipation of having to camp that next night in a place where there's not a lot of services available. I do it kicking and screaming. I'm going to be rolling right by it, through it, because I believe the bus does stop there. But I'm going to keep going, and it'll drop me off at a reasonable hour in the late morning / early afternoon, and then I'll be able to ride 66 miles up and over Leggett Hill, up and over Rockport Hill, and get the heck back to the coast. It's going to be hot. It's going to be probably not terribly comfortable. I usually like to leave Burlington Campground in the 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock hour. So I'm going to be actually bicycling through the heat of the day a little bit later than I would like to. But the reward is that if I can pull this off, and I'm sure I will be able to, I'm going to be able to get to Fort Bragg that night. I've already got my plans for that night. I've got a hotel already booked. Yes, I'm going to stay in a hotel rather than McCarricher State Park, because the next morning is a very early morning for transit for that final transit leg. But of course, I'll also get to enjoy North Coast Brewing and a whole host of other things that Fort Bragg has to offer. Really underrated city. I really like Fort Bragg quite a bit. Then it's a combination of inland bus that gets me all the way down to Santa Rosa, California, and then another bicycling adventure to Samuel P. Taylor State Park. I have not been there in so long, and it holds another really special place in my heart. Really fascinating people that are there frequently, sometimes a mix of bike tourists and folks who are doing their own thing, man. It's the Bay Area. And then the last day is all cycling across the Golden Gate Bridge to San Francisco. I'm really excited for all of this. The fact that between the transit and the biking, I can do this in 8 days, but still get all of those things that I just said to you. These are some of the things I look most forward to in any kind of a bike trip. I'm only counting a few compromises, quite frankly, and I'm still getting quite a bit, which means you get quite a bit of it too. And of course, there's lots of things that can go wrong, which is always fun for podcasting, right? Hopefully it won't, because there are a couple of really critical spots in all of this. If things become problematic, it may end up creating a bit of a problem. I do have a wiggle room day towards the end of the trip, which would be spent in San Francisco anyways. Hopefully I'm going to get a chance to see Mysterious James. He's off in Europe gallivanting right now, maybe back, hopefully. So maybe we'll get him on the pod. We'll have to see. Hi, James. So much fun. Looking forward to sharing all of this with you. Quick programming reminder, and I know this is a short pod this week. Apologies for that. Got to get this in. Got some travel coming up, as you just heard. A lot going on. Programming reminder. Next week, we're slotting in the August best of a few days early. It'll drop next Thursday, but it is a fantastic best of. It's featuring the absolutely fabulous Mary McGowan, the Rebel Without a Car, really excited to bring that back to you. And then, of course, the week after that, part 1 of the tour journal. So really looking forward to this tour and sharing it with all of you. And as always, we like to close out the show with a special shout out to the Pedal Shift Society. Because of support from listeners like you, Pedal Shift is a weekly bicycle touring podcast with a global community, expanding into live shows and covering new tours. If you like what you hear, you can support the show for $5, $2, or even $1 a month. And there's one-shot and annual options. If you're not into the small monthly thing, check it all out at pedalshift.net/society. On to the society. Kimberly Wilson, Caleb Jenkinson, Cameron Lean, Andrew McGregor, Michael Hart, Keith Nagel, Brock Didis, Thomas Skadow, Marco Lowe, Terrence Manson, Harry Telgadas, Chris Barron, Mark Van Ram, Brad Hipwell, Mr. T, Nathan Poulton, Stephen Dickerson, Vince LaGreco, Cody Florchinger, Tom Beninati, Greg Braithwaite, Sandy Pizzio, Jeff Muster, Seth Pollock, Joseph Quinn, Drew Porter, Byron Patterson, Joachim Robber, Ray Jackson, Jeff Fry, Kenny Mikey, Lisa Hart, John Denkler, Steve Hankel, Miguel Quinones, Alejandro Aviles Reyes, Keith Spangler, Greg Towner, Jody Zeranin, Lucas Barwick, Michael Baker, Brian Bechtal, Reinhard Biggle, Greg Middlemiss, Connie Moore, William Gothman, Brian Benton, Joan Churchill, Mike Bender, Rick Weinberg, Billy Crafton, Gary Matushak, Greg Latoile Lopez, James Sloan, Jonathan Dillard, John Funk, Ronald Paroli, Dave Roll, Brian Hafner, Misha LeBlanc, Ari Messenger, David Kropke, Todd Grossbeck, Wally Estrella, Sue Reinert, John Lico, Stephen Granada, Philip Mueller, Robert Lackey, Dominic Carroll, Jackie McCullough, John Hickman, Carl Presseau, David Neves, Hattie Louise, Terry Fitzgerald, Peter Steinmetz, Timothy Fitzpatrick, Michael Izuski, Hank O'Donnell, David Zanoni, David Weil, Matthew Sponsell, Chad Reno, Spartan Dale, Carolyn Ferguson, Peggy Littlefield, Lauren Allensmith, Eric Burns, Thomas Pearl, Darren McKibben, Richard Stewart, Dave Fletcher, Jack Smith, Luke Parkinson, Ryan Patterson, Cyrus Faravar, John Gardner, Sam Scruggs, Dwight Pintinger, Connie Bowder, Rob Merrifield, and thanks to all past and anonymous folks for helping make this show happen. Thank you for joining. You can find Pedal Shift at pedalshift.net for more great bicycle touring content. You can hear the Pedal Shift project through Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. Opening music courtesy of Jason Kent off his self-titled album. The track is called America. Check out his band Sunfield's latest release, Mono Mono, wherever cool music is available.